This is a prayer for the mission of the church. The Lord be with you. Almighty God, you sent your Son, Jesus Christ, to reconcile the world to yourself. We praise and bless you for those whom you have sent the power of the Spirit to preach the gospel to all nations. We thank you that in all parts of the earth, a community of love has been gathered together by their prayers and labors, and that in every place your servants call upon your name. For the kingdom and the power and the glory are yours forever. Amen. So we have a few highlights. We might just have to go, and are we filming this, Jared?
Yes.
Okay, we're at least doing that. So I have a few notes, and then I want to call a couple of folks to come up and share their thoughts with you. But I was thinking, if I had to pick a biblical story, I spent some time looking at that, saying, what biblical story reminds me of what we've gone through the past 2 years? And so here's something that came to me. There's the story of Jacob wrestling with the angel. Do you know that story? At the ford of the river Jabbok, and after he battles with the angel, he's given a new name and he walks away with a limp. So that rang true to me. We have gone through a lot these past 2 years, and we are continuing to walk, but it has definitely left a mark. It's definitely left a mark on all of us. So there's that one. You can also look at the story of the transfiguration. Jesus goes up on the mountain to pray, and Peter and James and John have encountered with something beyond themselves. Something beyond themselves. And Peter impulsively, in that moment, lays out a plan to grasp some semblance of control in that situation. And they're overshadowed by a cloud that teaches them that such an encounter with God's presence is beyond our control. And that story swirled in my heart too. And that story leads back to the story of Moses on Mount Sinai, when he encounters the presence of God in the burning bush, and he removes his sandals, remember, because he says, I need to honor this new space that I have stepped into. When God doesn't give him the name that he asked for, but pushes him beyond the initial idea that Moses had for how things were going to work. So that story came swirling into, but if I'm really honest, the story that sums it all up are the stories of the plagues. Just a series of plagues. If it's not the pandemic, it was lightning strikes and ice storms and all that we have gone through. So that was a fun just to kind of sit and say, where do we find ourselves in these stories, and how do these stories speak to where we are? So that is where I am now. This is my 9th annual meeting with you, and if I'm counting right, it's 194 for the parish as a whole. And we're looking right over the horizon to our bicentennial campaign. And what I want you to know is that over the next 5 years, we're going to step into a space of a 5-year intentional strategic planning phase. So we are primed at this spot to come off of a really difficult 2 years and to pivot and to plant our feet and look forward and look at where is the Spirit leading us in the next 5 years, so that when that time comes, we can celebrate together and step into what will be our 3rd century. Some folks have been here for all 3. But I've thought a lot these past 2 years, and we all have, about how we've been challenged, how we've really been challenged, how this has been a difficult time. But what we've also heard from many, many of you is that, strangely, these past 2 years have given us all, they forced us to pay attention to places in our lives that we needed to shift. Places in our lives where we needed to evaluate what we held dear, how we lived, what assumptions that we've had, and we shifted and we pivoted from that And people have taken risks and they've lived in new ways. They've let things go. So there's this wonderful framework in the classical Christian sense. So there's these three movements. And the first movement is called purgation. And you recognize those things in your life that you need to let go of so that you can step more fully into a space where you are illumined, like Moses and like Jesus and Peter and James and John. And then in those moments where you are illumined, you realize more fully the union that we all share with each other and with God. So that's what these past 2 years have meant to me. Underneath all the hardship and the enormous amount of stress. So I wonder what has this brought up for you and continues to do so? Because our life has changed. I mean, the fact that we're having an annual meeting with people logged on from home, this shows you the fact that we worship and have people zoomed in. If you were at Edgar's service, we could share with his family in Puerto Rico, and everyone turned and waved, and his mother sent a note, and we read the note from his mom while we were all waiting. We are going into a new phase, a new stage of our common life. And there is a lot that we will hold that we have always held. And there's a lot that we will continue that are the most meaningful parts of our life. And there's a lot that has changed. And we're being challenged to look at both of those things, to ask ourselves, what do we hold and what do we let go of so that we can pivot and look at fresh ways and listen to where the Spirit is leading us. So we're going to hear a good bit about that later this morning when Cheryl talks about the survey, about what people have learned, what we all have learned, and how we see the Spirit leading us. So that's where I think we are. To put it in a nutshell, we're in a both and phase right now, a both and phase. And it's that, to just spend another minute or two, that is a sensitive spot because it challenges us, because we're not just focused on maintaining, because we've gone so long the past 2 years in having to shift the way that we've done things, that it brings up a whole lot of stuff. A lot of stuff gets raised. But that I have heard less and less and less, and now I don't hear it at all. That common phrase that we all hear when we've been caught in those maintenance cycles and let that momentum just go forward. You would always hear, and I would always say, we've always done it that. And that was broken. That was broken. And so now we find ourselves in this fantastic, exciting, scary, a little anxious space where we're going to listen to each other and listen to the Spirit in each other as we discern what is this going to look like? What are the parts of our lives that we honor the most, that are the most meaningful? What are we going to concentrate on? And what are the things that we can pause, take a deep breath, look at each other and say, we give thanks to God that this served us well, but now we can release it. Or we can come at it with fresh eyes and with fresh heart. So I think the next 5 years of our life are going to be fantastic. They're going to be fascinating years. And it's going to happen across the board. You're going to hear in the coming weeks about updates with the building. You know, the campus that we all share. We learn and continue to learn how place matters. Place matters. We've also learned that it's going to be a little while before I can even broach about renovating the day. I don't think it would go well if we just scheduled that we're all going to move back out of the nave in this summer. Wouldn't go well for me. But there are some things that we can do. There are some scaled things that we can do across our particular footprint, to put it that way. So you're going to hear about that in the coming weeks as well. So any broad questions that you have, I encourage you to write them down. write them down and reach out to us. Today is Sonia's first day as senior warden. And you're going to hear from Dan a little bit later. Dan served 1 month. So our warden served 2-year staggered terms where there's always one warden who knows what's going on. Dan had 1 month until COVID. So he was senior warden in a typical fashion for the month of February 2020. And then March hit. So all of us have held so much. But I hope what you hear from Kathy and from Cheryl and from Hank, when you look across the board, I hope what you get out of this meeting is that the parish is strong and faithful. I hope you get a sense of that. And when you look at where the finances are, because if ever there was a moment where it was clear that the finances of the parish are an embodiment of where the energy and faithfulness is now. Coming off of what we have gone through the past 2 years, the story that we have as a parish, and the story that we have as a community. I want to highlight one more thing, then I'm going to thank the staff and hand it over to Hank. I want to encourage you to consider that a pivotal piece of this next part of our life is going to be looking at different ways of doing Christian education and spiritual formation. One of the things that we have realized is that a lot of assumptions that we have had around how church works and what church means have been challenged. And it's going to take, we're in a place where we're going to need to look at each other, pause, stand on our feet, and look at each other and ask, based on whatever particular stage and place I am in my life, how can I engage more fully in my practice of faith? How do I need to learn about my practice of faith? And how do I need to intentionally engage? So what we're doing, we're setting up a school for Christian practice that is a framework that can hold conversations at all parts of life. Newborns all the way, in our case, to people who are 92. That is roughly our age span as a parish. 10 centuries. We have to figure out how we're going to refresh and renew ourselves and deepen our practice of faith across the spectrum of 10 centuries. So what I want to invite you to do is this. This goes beyond just showing up for church on Sunday morning. But coming to church on Sunday morning is important because it's a discipline. It's a practice. Showing up for church and sitting next to the people who you've gotten to know and love, who sit in your pew, near your pew. That is what we learned early on when Cynthia and I sat down. We were trying to figure out with the pastoral care team, how do we stay in touch with each other? The most organic and easiest way was to find people and ask them who sits around you. That's where that started. And from there, that circle got wider and wider. So here's your challenge. And I want to be honest. The staff and the vestry have pretty much mapped out ways that we can think of strange ideas to bring people in. We have reached a point as a parish where we all have to own it. So this is a risky and a vulnerable thing, but the most effective way to build back your pew community is for you to reach out and call the people who sit around you who you don't see. Those are your colleagues, your peers, your fellow parishioners. Those are the people who on Sunday morning, when you've had a bad day with tears in your eyes, they're the first to see it. So as we go into these next few weeks, you're going to hear notes from us about that to say, who have you reached out to? You know, who have you called? Who have you noticed is not here sitting around you? And can you take the risk to reach out to them and say, I missed you. And it would mean a lot to me to have time to spend with you and catch up, at least on Sunday. And I want to thank some folks. And Brenda, I hope Brenda's long gone. She's always long. Wendy's long gone. Brenda's at home. So speaking of a hybrid staff, we are a fully hybrid staff. Some of us cannot come in and work anymore indoors. We can only work from home. So we have shifted and we're holding ways that we stay in touch with each other by Zoom call and phone. But I want to thank specifically Reba and Cynthia and Mary Dembler and Brenda and Cheryl and Jerry and Jennifer and Jess and Mike Thibodeau, who you probably have never met, but who you should be very grateful for. He is our custodian. So Mike comes 2 or 3 times a week and comes through and cleans and straightens and is always here and available to us to reach out to him. Thank you. And if we could take a moment for each of you to thank them for all that the staff has held and wrestled with to keep us on our feet. Thank you from the bottom of our heart. To Lynn Swanson, who probably she had to run out. She was, oh no, she's still there in time. There you are. To Lynn, thank you for your ability and willingness to come in on the staff at a difficult transition point. Lynn laughed and said it was several weeks before she even knew what people looked like in the choir. Because she only saw from the eyes up. So thank you for being here with us and for weaving in and bringing your gifts and strength. And to Meg McPeak and Liz Kant, thank them when you see them for all that they have held with Children of Grace. The parents from COG who are here, some of them are here as I look through. You all know what a tricky sprocket it is to hold all of those parts from different age groups and pods and classes, and teachers and school administrators who are here know all too well. These have not been easy days. So if the thought occurs to you, write them a card, send the staff a card, or call them. Call them for once so they get a phone call that does not say, I'm sorry to tell you my child is COVID. Call them and just say, I'm calling to tell you thank you. And I also want to thank Betsy and David Powell for being here with us, for helping hold pieces while I was gone on my break and Cynthia was gone on her surgery. And to the vestry, thank you all for what you have held in a very difficult time. To Dan Scott, to Shadron Shield, who we keep in our prayers this morning. Her father just died, so she can't be with us this morning. But Cheryl has adapted the presentation that she's going to give. And to Jason Bourne, our chancellor, whose job is endlessly fascinating, he will tell you. It is never a thought of. Jason will be with me at some point the week of February the 28th when I go to testify to Mr. Putnam's trial. So it's just never a dull moment what goes on. So I want to invite Hank to come up to give an update on finances and the budget. But while he comes up, I want to thank all of those who serve on our finance committee, that able group of people who have really held the health of this parish so well in a difficult time. So thank you all. Some of them are logged on and some of you are here. But thank you. Chairman of the Finance Committee and have been for the last 2 years. Like Dan, we came in at a very uncertain time. But and it's been a challenging time trying to run and formulate a game plan for the finances for the church, both from a budget standpoint and from raising funds, trying to understand where we're going and how that's going to play out with the church. But it's in my view,
During these uncertain times, that it's very comforting to have a place like Grace Episcopal Church to be involved with, both spiritually and physically, and doing things here to try to be a part of the community. So it's because of things like that that I think that our finances have done as well as they have. We are in a very strong position currently. And just to give you a little breakdown, a little bit more of that, we ended this last year in a very strong position with a sizable surplus. Now, primarily that sizable surplus is due to two things, and it's due to our staff in control of our expenses. They were able to bring that well under budget, and then also with the PPP federal loan that we had. That was in the amount of $158,000 or so. Of that, we decided from the finance committee and the vestry that 40,000 of that should go towards COG. So we carved out 40,000 of that to help them with their expenses, and then the rest was into our budget. With that in mind, I wanted to break down a little bit of where some of the surpluses went toward and what kind of numbers we were looking at. So at the end of the year, we ended up with, like I said, a sizable surplus. Of the surplus, we decided to give outreach an added budget to $48,000 from our surplus to add together with what budget of this year was going to have. So they're going to have a total of $105,000 next year. Now, we're not going to say that's going to continue every year, but they have to bump up this year because of our surplus, and we thought that was a good avenue of expense to go towards. So, so 48,000 additional from our surplus went into, and that got put into Doug Smith outreach that will be added together with outreach 57,000, making a total of 105,000. The building reserve got an additional, and most of the finance committee would love to hear this, because that's where we'd like to funnel a lot of our extra income coming in is toward the building reserve to maintain our buildings and our structures here. But we were able to put in an extra $167,000 into the building reserve. And then our operating reserve got an additional $51,000. So that'll help with expenses and things like that Stuart and the vestry want to go forward with. But again, most of the surpluses were due to those two main things: the control of our expenses and the PPP loan, which we will not get enough of it. We decided to already do it one time. We didn't go for the second one because we saw that we didn't need that. We had such a strong financial position here. We had to do the first one because it was so uncertain as to where we were headed. But it was a good use of the money, and I think the finance committee was very conservative with the use of it and the allocation. 3 points of interest that I want to bring up with the 2022 budget is that we were able to give all the staff pay raises. If anybody has seen what is going on out in this world and read about the cost, the inflationary issues that are going on, and all the increased costs to staff throughout. Everybody's looking for extra staff and are paying extra and extra money. We want to maintain our core. So in order to do that, we need to reimburse them for being here. So it was upon guidance of Stuart that we were able to give everybody pay raises to try to help them through this cost of living increases and inflationary time that we're in. So we were glad to be able to do that. Like I already said, outreach got bumped up to 105,000, and then we were able to give 12,000 to Stuart for his worship and formation group that he was talking about just a minute ago. Really, that's all. I am rolling off as chairman of the finance committee because the been there for 2 years. It's time for me to hand it off to Randall Frost. Thank you, Randall. Appreciate your help. He's been on the committee forever, like most of our gentlemen that are there, and they used to. But Randall is very capable, and I'll be on the finance committee with him, along with a lot of other folks that have been there for a long time. We brought in some new folks that we want to talk to. So, without further ado, if there are any questions, I'll be glad to try to answer them. If I can answer them, I'll get somebody who can, or if you think of questions in the future, please feel free to ask me or any of our finance committee. We will very happily be able to find somebody who has the answer or will give you the answer accordingly. So, any questions? All right, thank you very much.
Thanks, Dan. Like I said, to build on the building fund, what you're going to see in the next few months, really looking at this year, is a series of spending some of that to catch up on some long-standing maintenance needs. So just know that that is coming, and we're grateful to have those funds. I want to invite Kathy Futrell to come out. You may not remember this, but Kathy chaired the search committee that brought me here. So she is, yeah. Forgive her. I wanted you all to hear from her, from what she has held and the outreach group for many, many years, because I think what we've learned these past 2 years is how strong we are as a parent, and there's no one who can tell that story when it comes to outreach as well as Kathy King. Thank you.
You saw how Hank rolled off after 2 years?
No.
Good morning. More than 11 million children in the United States live in food insecure households. 19% of Black households and 16% of Hispanic households experience food insecurity. Nearly 20 people per minute are physically abused by an intimate partner. This equates to more than 10 million women and men in a year. On a typical day, there are more than 20,000 phone calls placed to domestic violence hotlines nationwide. 1 in 15 children are exposed to intimate partner violence each year, and 90% of these children are eyewitnesses. 3.8 million adults are trafficked for forced sexual exploitation, and 1 million children are trafficked for commercial sexual exploitation. Over the past 9 years, Outreach has distributed over $600,000 in support of local charities that address these issues. The work of the Outreach Committee over the decades is a testament to the Spirit's work among our people. Stuart asked me to choose 1 or 2 agencies to highlight this morning, but the operative word here is choose. How do I choose? Do I start with the oldest? I could choose the food pantry, begun in 1977 by First Baptist, First Presbyterian, St. Paul, First United, and Grace, serving 5 or 6 times a year to provide fresh and non-perishable food to those in need. This ministry has continued for 45 years. In 2021, the food pantry served 746 households, 2,369 people, 900 of which were children and 339 were seniors. They provided 26,573 pounds of food. Or I could choose good news. Over 25 years, our committed Good News team has been preparing and delivering food every Tuesday to Good News at Noon. That's 1,300 Tuesdays. Grace was the first church to assist Gene investing in this ministry at Good News, and Outreach has supported the feeding ministry and their building fund for its new facility at Dorsey and MLK. And the new building will allow for separate housing for female homeless. They currently have 7 or 8 cooks. They need more. Face it, we're all getting old. Or I choose Centerpoint, originally known as the Christian Education Center. It was established in 1967, which is 55 years ago. Origins tracing back to a conversation between one pastor and one parishioner, a vision to develop the first released time religious education program in the Southeast, allowing students to leave campus for independent education. Students go to classes at Centerpoint in the Old Testament, New Testament, world religion, and ethics. Vision was ultimately shared by 4 churches: Grace, First Presbyterian, First Methodist, and St. Paul. In 1985, student and family counseling was added. In 1994, a mentoring program was added. Prevention programs concentrate on healthy relations, human trafficking, character building, responsible decision making, and our schools tell us that the students that have gone through these programs graduate at a rate 20 points higher than students who have not been able to take advantage. Or I could choose Family Promise. This program has been in existence for 10 years, but has already made its mark on the community. Family Promise began in 2012 to provide emergency shelter to children and their families. Grace has been a supporter of that. You might remember when we shared food and fellowship and shelter 4 times a year. Through a monumental effort to secure funding, Family Promise has been able to purchase a facility on McKever Road, which they now call their homestead. It was originally a Methodist church. This facility provides shelter for 3 families with plans to increase capacity in the future. And we will continue supporting their efforts by providing meals and fellowships probably 4 or 5 times a year. Our next opportunity to serve is the week of the 20th. Also operating out of the same facility is their family food market, which is a client choice food pantry where low-income families can shop the items they need. A diaper bank that began in 2018 that distributes maximum of 2 bundles of diapers a month. The Christmas Promise store, established in 2018, empowers families by providing a store where parents can actually go in and shop for the Christmas gifts for their own children at drastically reduced prices. The Little Steps Community Daycare Center is a licensed program that serves children ages 6 weeks to 5 years to all low-income families in Hall County. Ministries I mentioned are only a small part of what Grace Church supports. And I feel like I'm standing here preaching to the choir because I look out and I see all people here who are already doing so much in support of these ministries. And I know Stuart said I should choose 1 or 2, but rather than me choose, I challenge you to choose, as so many of you have already. What you might do to support these agencies that your outreach committee support, whether it's diapers for the Hispanic Alliance, food, or volunteers with the food pantry. I know Good News needs more cooks. Centerpoint is looking for mentors. Family Promise is looking for daycare school teachers. Whether it's one of these agencies that I have described or one of the others that Grace supports, I invite you to participate. Thank you.
You can't leave. No. I want to call on Cheryl now, who is beaming in from the International Space Station. She's from our conference room, taking care of herself. So Cheryl is going to share with you some updates on our formation cluster work. And then we also have an interactive piece that we're going to have us do. So Cheryl.
Well, good morning. Good morning, and thanks, Kathy. Thanks, Kathy.
No, hang on.
Hold on. Are we good?
Sorry about that.
Okay. All right. Well, good morning. And thanks, Kathy, because, you know, when you think about what all the formation efforts are aimed at, is for all of us finding our place to plug in. And Kathy has highlighted lots and lots of places where we can all use our gifts. So thank you. But this morning, I wanted to share with you the results of our parish survey. You know, the last couple of years have brought us lots of challenges and lots of changes. And the vestry and the staff and the clergy thought it would be now, as we're coming out of the worst of pandemic, would be a good time to pause and take stock. And see where we are and what we've learned, so that those can inform our plans going forward. So over the last 6 months, we have had many individual conversations. We have held a variety of listening circles with groups that were meeting online and in person during the pandemic. And then we submitted, we sent out a survey to the parish and gave people opportunities to respond in writing and in person, to just ask basically for essential questions in good Ignatian Examine style. We asked you to wonder with us about what brought you to grace originally, what brings you here now, and then in terms of your experience of the pandemic, what did you find helpful or supportive or encouraging? And what did you miss and what didn't work? And we have gathered data from more than 130 people. And thank you to all the people who took time to share your reflections with us. And this morning, I'd like to share with you what we've learned so far, and talk about next steps. But first, I'd like to thank the members of the committee that have been doing this work: Shadron Gilles, Dave Westfall, and Sonia McClendon. Thank you. It has been a lot, and it still keeps going. I'm going to share my screen and show you some of our results so far. We asked you first, why'd you come to Grace? And you know, one of the top answers, of course, would be for family. As a cradle Episcopalian, or married an Episcopalian, or grew up, that came to town looking for an Episcopal church, that is a significant percentage of why you came originally. But also things mentioned consistently, we're looking for a church that was inclusive and that aligned with my values. And of course, drawn to our liturgy, worship, music, and preaching. But the biggest thing that comes up over and over and over again about why you came and why you stayed is the sense of community that you found here at Grace. People spoke over about feeling welcomed and finding their spiritual home and appreciating your fellow parishioners. And no surprise, the reason you still come is that sense of family and community. That was what we heard over and over and over again. And that you appreciate the opportunity to worship together in our Episcopal Common Liturgy. And particularly during the pandemic, we've heard how important the music and the space and the physical practice of worship really is. And then also important why you come now is an opportunity to practice that faith, to care for each other in our church community, and also to work together in the community at large, like Kathy has shown us so many of us do. As far as the pandemic specifically, there's no surprise, nobody likes online everything, but we did hear over and over again how important it was to have virtual efforts available.
I don't know.
Hold on.
Go ahead, Cheryl.
Okay. Okay.
I was answering a question for somebody.
Oh, okay, sorry. And people appreciated the personal phone calls and the connections between one another that helped to maintain a sense of community even when we couldn't be together in person. People commented on the virtual connections through online classes and meetings and small groups. And there was a consistent thread of surprise at how much community could be built online, although of course that's not true for everyone. People commented that during the pandemic, they practiced their own individual practices, and their spiritual growth was in fact supported by that personal, deepening their own personal practice and by resources that we were able to send home. Like Stuart mentioned earlier, we had a number of new members that joined during this funny time. And some of them came purely from, or came through the virtual connections that they met there first. And then we also heard about people who have not been able to come even before the pandemic, who, because of all the virtual offerings, were able to continue to participate at least as much, and if not more, who would otherwise become isolated because of physical or geographical limits. So those were blessings of the pandemic and virtual worship. And then we asked what didn't work and what you missed. And of course, everybody, again, we heard how important community is, and what you missed was being in community in the way that we're accustomed to doing that. Everybody missed in-person worship and the physicality of kneeling and praying and singing together and being in the space as we worship together. People missed seeing faces, and we heard we missed hugs and missed communion, in-person communion. There were several comments about missing music at the 8:15 service. And then, of course, there's lots of frustrations with technology and with protocols, and a sense of separation and isolation. And some folks did not feel supported during this time. So these are the things that we heard, the hard things of the pandemic. And when we asked about what kinds of things you're looking for now, what's most important now? And again, over and over and over again, the most important thing seems to be, we are a parish family, we are a community, and we want to be together as that community. There's a really strong desire to reconnect both socially and spiritually, to worship together and play together and pray together. We heard that some folks are reevaluating, you know, in this, the virtual opportunities have led some people to reevaluate how they're spending their time and their energy. When do you drive into town, and when do you take a meeting online or take a worship service online? We heard lots of we heard lots of desire to get together for outreach and service projects. People have missed that. And a real important desire for meaningful relationships, both in our immediate families, in our church families, and in our larger community, for looking on building those relationships. People are redefining what is church, what is the habit of church, how do we participate, what is the role of the church in our community. And then we also heard over and over again we wanted to continue hybrid access to worship and meetings and to all the special offerings. So those were the initial things that we heard. And now we were talking about the most important thing seems to be right now regathering as community. So our question for you now is, what does community mean to you today? What does what things are you ready to participate in? What things are calling, what would feel nurturing to you? Because that was the overwhelming thing, was how important that was. So, and it won't look the same for everybody. And, you know, some folks, as the pandemic is beginning, hopefully, to wind down, some folks are ready to re-engage. Some folks can't re-engage exactly like they'd like to. And some folks need a little more time. So we want to hear from you. What are you, where are you now? What are you longing for now? What does community look like for you now? And what kinds of things would help you be able to engage? You know, some of our groups, for example, the choir and the women's group, have covenants for what coming together looks like. So those are the kinds of questions we're asking right now. And you will find on your table, or Stuart will help pass out, a little form. We got another survey for you. We would really like to hear from you. What are you ready for? Are you ready for GWAG to come back? Are you ready for foyers to come back? Are you interested? You know, we've talked in the past about setting up geographical small groups that could be study groups or book studies or whatever you wanted them to be. Are you interested in that kind of thing? You know, our men's ministry is getting started back up on third Tuesdays. And would you like to hook in with that? And then, do you have an idea that we haven't ever tried that you want to see happen, that you've heard about somewhere else, or you would like to experiment with? Those are the kinds of questions we have now. Please, please, please take a minute to fill out the form that they're passing out or that are on your tables. Or if you're online, shoot me an email. Tell me if you would like to be plugged in somewhere, or you have an idea that you'd like us to consider. Please, we really want to hear from you so that we can put you in touch with like-minded folks and organize next steps, because we really are longing to get the community that we're all so hungry for and missing. So that's where we are so far. Does anybody have any questions or things we can do?
If you would, fill them out and just drop them in a basket on the table. Just drop them off there. We will gather those up. If you also don't have a chance to complete it, you can take it with you and put it in the offering plate. You can always put stuff in the offering plate.
Mm-hmm.
We have found strange things. That's a class that we're going to do at some point. Strange things we found in the offering plate. Let's thank Cheryl and the group who's done all of this work. It's very, very helpful to kind of gauge where we are and where to see the Spirit leading us. I want to see if Dan has any brief words that he wants to share before we get close to the end, and then we'll announce within a prayer who our next 4 vestry folks will be, as Dan and Mike Whitmire, Joanne Manry, and Gail Sargent are rotating on. So if we can take a moment to thank them for all of it. And we're going to get you all gifts, of course. We were just going to get you like an oxygen tank at one point. We thought that would be a fitting gift. But Dan, I want to see if you have any thoughts to share from your point of view as senior warden these past 2 years.
Thank you, Stuart. This is strange to hear your voice come back to you. It comes from practice, right? I was asked to do a quick reflection, and as my time with senior board comes to a conclusion, that task was pretty daunting. It was an easy thing to do. I tend to look forward, so it's really hard to look back. Oh, we did all this and we did all that. But my daughter, my 13-year-old daughter, has converted me into much more of a fan of, let's say, the Beatles. Much more, she knows more about the Beatles than I ever. Yeah, she's a big fan. Queen, I'm now a big fan of Queen, and she's a big fan of Rolling Stone. And so, what better way to start this than with the kind of the immortalized Rolling Stones lyrics? You can't always get what you want, but if you try so much, you just might find get what you. Okay. The challenges over these past couple of years were clearly unforeseen. Those responding to COVID and its challenges, we quickly realized that there was going to be no one single course of action that would ever make everyone happy. That's the challenge right there. So for me, I just choose to look back at this point, and I want to kind of go through this quickly with you. Is I'm very direct with them. I'm looking back with amazing gratitude how we went through this and that we did. A couple items come to mind: the decentralization of the decision-making process for medical protocol that brought local legal minds and medical people to bear on this issue. Many parishioners were on the front lines and in the field, bringing their expertise to bear to what they call thread the needle. Many times you heard that. That's a necessary term, though, but it's all too often used for what was, we were trying to come up with what was best. That's a hard one, too. Keep in mind, there were extra meetings, there was data analysis by a bunch of folks, and then they had a consensus to speak with one voice, and that demonstrates their strength and their wisdom for all involved in the face of an ever-evolving landscape. And that landscape also had unknown consequences. You look back, it's so clear, but when you're there and trying to go through it and you get a group of people to come together to speak with one common voice among multiple opinions, that's hard to do. And this group did it. I'm very grateful for that. And I'm grateful for the unanimous support that I received, at least I feel like I received from the vestry. So thank you for that. Next was the leadership and direction of our priests and staff. The many ideas, changes of the new infrastructures that now brought to bear on our worship services, but also on the formational groups to bring them into a virtual world. All those folks involved, they conceived a plan, they sourced the materials. I mean, who knew what an owl was, right? I mean, come on, you got to find these things. They garnered the resources to procure it. They implemented, they advocated, they tested it. It broke, they troubleshot it, right? Or troubleshooted it, whatever you say. They got it. So the staff shifted to a remote work environment, and they got the job done. Many personal hardships were suffered in the staff, especially, and currently being suffered. And through all this, they're still getting the job done. Clearly, with one hand seemingly tied behind our backs, brings to mind to me the footprints picture. It was then that I carried you. The speed of implementation, the next one is such items fly in the face of some of what our strengths are as the Episcopal Church, namely our tradition. Grace is under, Father Stewart, Grace is known for a few more words now around diocese. Besides new words like Zoom meeting, Facebook Live, audio video implementation, best practices, protocols. That's a new word that came up, a couple years ago. We hear it all too often. Instead, Stewart really did a great job and was at the forefront of diocese, and new words come to mind with Grace. Speed to market is one, if you want to use a business term. These things got implemented pretty quick. And I want to thank you for your leadership and vision in a changing time for that. I'm grateful for all who remained faithful during this time. This year's pledge has exceeded $1 million. It's an amazing expression of our parish's intervening. And I've expressed this in the past, that Christianity, Grace Church, and Universal Church as a whole are forces for good in the world. They're necessary. They lighten comfort, and they provide a symbolic place for ground worship, and they are worth supporting. And if anything has come to light in the last few years, is that we might take less things for granted, from the simplicity of going to church, fellowship over a meal or a holiday trip with family, to full store shelves, to painful, to plentiful availability of fuel, energy, and heat. And we give thanks to God for such things. And as we go about our lives, we all seem a little more aware of such things than we were 2 years ago. I'd like to thank Polly Jones for transitional advice and support through my experience here. I always have to get myself together again. I always need to be there for you. And to some, we will be there for you too. I'd like to close here with it's kind of a long prayer. I'm a long prayer kind of guy, but I think it just sums up everything that we are going through these days. And it's taken from a diary of private prayer from John Bailey. I'd just like to read this to you. So the Lord is with you. And let us never think, O eternal Father, that we are here to stay. Let us still remember that we are a stranger and pilgrim on earth. For here we have no continuing city, but we seek one to come. Preserve us by the grace, good Lord, from so losing ourselves in the joy of earth, that we may have no longing left for pure joys of heaven. Let not the happiness of this day become a snare to our too worldly hearts. And if instead of happiness we have today suffered any disappointment or defeat, if there have been any sorrow where we had hope for joy, or sickness where we had hope for health, give us grace to accept from the hands a loving reminder that this is not our home. We thank thee, O Lord, that thou hast set eternity within our hearts, that no earthly things can ever fully satisfy its holy. We thank thee for every present joy, is so mixed with sadness and unrest, as to lead our minds upward to the contemplation of a more perfect blessing. And above all, we give thanks to thee for the sure hope and promise of an endless life which thou hast given us, and the glorious gospel of Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
I want to close by just thanking once more those who are willing to stand for election on the vestry and those who almost have served their time. But that makes it sound, well, like what it is. But we will also have Callie Black going to serve this next year as our treasurer as well, and Susan Leahy will serve as our clerk. And it is an extraordinary team, and it is one of the greatest strengths of this parish that every year that I've been here for 87 years now, every year you all are willing to put yourselves forward, and the slate every year that is up there is a difficult slate to even look at to see how do you select 4 out of 8. It's hard. And so to the nominating group who works to pull the slate of 8 together, thank you for all of your work. And so I want to close by weaving into a prayer those 4 who were chosen this year. Jeremy will pull them up. Nate Early, Joyce Green, Beth Nightlock, and Sally Pittman for those who will serve these next 3 years. I think we all know after the last 2 that it brings a heightened sense of not knowing what will come. And so there's a poignancy and an intentionality around serving on the vestry. I would ask, just in closing, before I close with a prayer, that the vestry, the new one that is starting today, meet with me in the conference room after the 10:45 service. If you would meet with me just briefly in there after the service, we'll gather and get our heads straight. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Dear God, we give you thanks for this parish. We give you thanks for your presence with us always. We give you thanks for all of the lessons we have learned about ourselves, about each other, and most of all about you. The way we are always reminded of your presence with us. We ask your particular blessing on Nate and Julie, Beth and Sally as they serve these next 3 years on the vestry of Grace Church. Be with all of those who continue in that space and hold what they hold. Be with the staff. Be with our spouses and our families. Be with all of those who serve on committees and in choirs, work with children and youth, with our community partners. Make us ever mindful of the blessings of our lives. It's through Christ we pray. Amen. Thank you all. Feel free to leave your notes in the basket or put them in a plate. And thank you very